Welcome to the video history of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Charles Dale Collins from Scottsdale, Arizona. Dr. Collins has just recently received the Pete and Weezy Hollis Community Service Award, and during that presentation, we learned that Dr. Collins has a history of the early days of the college that he is willing to share with our audience. So, Dr. Collins, thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, and thank you for all your years of service.
Well, thank you.
It's been tremendous, your
Let
leadership.
me just ask you a few questions so that our audience gets to know you.
All right.
It says you're in Scottsdale. Did you
Yes.
work in Scottsdale all the time, or?
No, I had my internship and residency at Cook County Hospital, and I practiced in the Chicago area for nearly 40 years, and I retired to Scottsdale, but I couldn't stand retirement. I wasn't housebroken, so I was investigating going to the Indian Health Service up at the Four Corners and volunteering there. But someone told me they were in need in the poor areas of Phoenix, down near South Mountain in Phoenix. That's largely Hispanic and African American, poor neighborhood. And they said they needed help there. I wouldn't be asked to do any deliveries or any surgery, but they certainly needed help in their clinics there. So I jumped at that opportunity to stay in the area there instead of going up to northern Arizona, up in the Four Corners area. And I've been there for over 20 years in that community. And it's been rewarding. It's, as they say, as long as you enjoy what you're doing, you never go to work. So that's the way I felt in my years in practice and my years there in that community. So it's been very rewarding to me.
Now, you indicated that you were a resident at Cook County Hospital
Yes.
in Chicago. And what year was that?
I was a resident from 1951, 52, and 53. At that time, you had to have your internship first. So I was a PGY2 by today's terminology when I, and another resident, was asked to go represent the residents at the first meeting of the American Academy, as it was called in those days, in the beginning. They want us to represent the residents to be sure that we were heard from. And unfortunately, when we got to Cincinnati, we were kind of brushed off. They said, oh, we're going to take care of that later. But they said, yes, they did have provisions in the offing to have a resident section. So that's how the junior fellowship came. And just to jump ahead a little bit, in 1953, the meeting was in Chicago. And the one that was very instrumental in organizing the junior fellows, as they were called in those days, and still are, was Dr. Augusta Webster. And there was, at the time, I was a resident, we went through in pairs, and my pair happened to be Charlotte Kerr, who was a very capable female, and Dr. Webster said, since this is a women's organization, I think a woman ought to be the first president of the junior fellows. So she said, there's nothing against you, Dale, but Charlotte's going to be our first president. So that's how Charlotte Kerr became the first president, really at Dr. Webster's suggestion that she be nominated, elected as the first resident president. So
let me take you back to that first time when you were at Cook County. Maybe you could share a little bit with us who your attendings were at that time.
Well, they've all passed on. Of course, Dr. Webster, as I mentioned, was second in command. Dr. James Fitzgerald was the head of the OB department. Dr. Frederick Falls was very prominent. He was a head at the University of Illinois at that time, and Dr. Abe Blash was a very prominent obstetrician, gynecologist, and surgeon at that time. Dr. Herb Schmitz was a well-known GYN surgeon from Loyola University. He did not do obstetrics, and also the head of Northwestern at that time was George Gardner, who also was not trained in obstetrics, as was neither Dr. Schmitz. They were both gynecologists exclusively. So they weren't so involved with the American College at that time because of the fact that they were single specialists in their own gynecology field.
Dr. Schmitz was the first treasurer of the American College.
That's what I can say. He went on and he saw the light and joined.
It's interesting. I have personally scrubbed with Dr. Fred Falls and with Dr. Abe Lash. As a matter of fact, what you don't know about my history is that I trained at the University of Illinois and did rotations through Cook County Hospital. So very happy. I didn't realize we had that type of a relationship as well as your early history.
Yes,
those were very fascinating gentlemen. Rather dictatorial.
Yes, Dr. Fred Falls, in particular because he was being famous at that time to show that it didn't make any difference if you did a vertical incision for a cesarean or transverse. And I decided one day I wanted to go over and watch him to see. And the criticism among those of us who watched him was that they were all of his vertical incisions were actually classical, because he was a big man and he made a really high, what he called a low vertical incision. So we all felt that he was all doing the classicals. So he was a very interesting man and very active in your training, I'm sure.
Let me take you back to Cincinnati. Even though they did not really recognize you or accept you when you were there, tell me about that first meeting.
Well, they had many business meetings, of course, that we were not allowed into, and they were, we found out later, they were getting settled on a name. The American Academy that they called was really, they felt that they were a sister to the American Academy of Pediatrics. So that's why they decided in the beginning they'd be called the American Academy of OB/GYN, since their sister organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, still kept the name Academy. But it was only later that they decided they would rather be more thought of like the American College of Surgeons than the American Academy. So I'm sure there was some infighting that we don't know about. That went on, they changed the name to American College.
Was there an education program at that meeting?
Yes, there was. Yes, there were papers presented. I don't remember anything about them, but there were educational programs in the beginning.
Now, you said about Dr. Webster. I
Yes.
met Dr. Webster once. She was quite old at that time, so obviously we didn't talk about this.
She was a pioneer. She really headed the cause for women in medicine in general, and especially in obstetrics. She took no quarter and she asked no quarter. She could swear with the best of us, and she was really a great person to all of us residents. She treated us all fairly, male or female. And as I said, my partner through all my residency was a female, and she was certainly treated like all the rest of us. I was glad to say that she took her turn. She asked no quarter either, and she pitched in and took her share of the work without claiming her femininity prevented her from performing. So that was the same way Dr. Webster was.
And when did Dr. Webster first decide that there would be a junior fellow and that there...
That was the very first year, 1951, that she taught that they had to have an organization for residents and that we should be part of the senior organization. So she was really instrumental in sending the two of us, although I don't think we did any good. We didn't do any harm, but they apparently others, and she had talked enough to the other members organizing the American Academy that there had to be a place for the residents to be part of the organization, and then as we graduated, we would become full-fledged members of the fellowship.
Now, where did you practice in Chicago?
I practiced in one of the southern suburbs. I practiced there from 1946 to about 1986, so 40 years.
Very good. Well, it's such a pleasure to hear you tell us about the early meetings, because we don't have much information on those early meetings of the college. You mentioned earlier 1963?
Yes.
Tell me about that meeting.
That was 1953.
I'm sorry, 53.
53. That was a meeting, I don't remember what hotel, but it was a meeting similar to what we're holding today. We had scientific meetings that were very good, and then of course they had the business meetings, and Dr. Kerr and I attended that business meeting where they first nominated and elected the first president of the Resident Society.
How long did that meeting last?
Oh, probably not an hour. It's a very brief meeting.
Very brief. How long did the educational component last?
I think that was a 2-day meeting. They had several sessions, very similar to what we have here today. We had not nearly as large as this, but they had papers presented. And the interesting thing, the American Academy wasn't universally popular among the obstetricians and gynecologists in Chicago at that time, because the Chicago Gynae Society was a very active organization, and many of the members felt that they didn't need another organization. So they were somewhat resistant, some of them were, in the beginning. So it wasn't 100% accepted by all of the obstetricians in Chicago at that time. So it took a couple of years, and gradually a majority of them joined the organization.
Why do you think they were against it?
They felt it was just another meeting to go to, and the Chicago Gynae Society at that time was very active. They had what they called wet clinics. I don't know if you remember them in your day, where the surgeon would operate, do his procedure in the morning with gynecologist, obstetrician in attendance, and then in the evening they would have the Gynae Society meeting where they had dinner and a paper would be presented. And usually they would roast the man that did the surgery in the morning. I'll never forget Dr. Diekman was doing he was going to do a cesarean hysterectomy. That was very popular. He tried to popularize it. If you're back in those days, it was once a section, always a section, and 2 sections was enough. So he said, well, why not just do a hysterectomy? So he was going to do a cesarean hysterectomy, and the patient they'd selected for him to do the section on had to be a breech. And he was pulling the arm out, and everybody was yelling, Doctor, Bill, it's an arm, it's an arm. He hadn't noticed that he had grabbed an arm instead of a foot when he was doing this. So that was, I'll always remember that meeting because they really roasted him to a fairly well. So the Gynae Society was very popular in Chicago at that time. So they weren't sure that they wanted to have another organization, that they were very satisfied with what they had. So that was the main point of resistance, but after they are aware that it was not only in the Midwest that this American Academy of Obstetricians was going to be nationwide, then they seemed to join the bandwagon, and it really took off.
Let me tell you, what have you seen as the biggest changes from that first meeting and the first parts of the college, then the academy that you went to now? What do you see as the biggest changes?
Oh, I think the educational capabilities are so much greater now with all the teaching aids that we have, and we have courses where you can have hands-on teaching laparoscopy to people. You can have the hands-on and essentially teaching them robotic surgery. Courses are so far advanced that I think a practicing gynecologist, obstetrician can come to a meeting like this and see something new. I think years ago that if you kept up on the literature, you really didn't see much new in the meetings, but today they're so far advanced in the meetings. But basically the format of the meetings are pretty much the same. They have different papers presented in various fields, and you can select the kind of course or meeting that you want to attend. That's really marvelous, the opportunities for the men practicing today and women.
Which there are far more women now than
Yes,
then.
that's the amazing thing too. Years ago it was all gray-haired, white-haired men, but now we have the white-haired, gray-haired ladies leading our organization, which is wonderful to see that they're taking over, and probably rightfully so.
What would you give as advice to a young person entering our specialty today based on what you have seen happen and what you project for the future? What type of advice would you give them?
I would say as long as you enjoy what you're doing, the mechanics, whether it's socialized medicine. Years ago, when Roosevelt was president, and the health bills were the Murray-Wagner-Dingle socialized medicine bill, and patients would say to me, "Doctor, what are you going to do when we have socialized medicine?" I tell them I'm going to be a doctor. That's what I love to do. So regardless of how they're paid, as long as you love what you're doing, you'll enjoy it. It'll be a wonderful life. And sure, it's going to change. I don't know if it's going to change, as we were talking before, about the hospitals are going to take over doing the deliveries, and the hospitals are going to do the GYN surgery. You and I were pretty much generalists. I think we thought we did good deliveries. I think we did good surgery. So they have to, and the younger people probably accept that change. They won't know what went on before. So as they're going through the training, they'll see it, and I think that they will accept it. And as long as they're doing what they like to do, it will be wonderful.
Dr. Collins, I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing some of this early history of the college with us. It's extremely important that we sometimes remember where we came from.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, and again, congratulations to you and all your many years of service. Thank you.